Compañeros, welcome to another edition, as I close the magic door that you do not see. Welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. I am Carlos El Chacon. I am joined today by Eugene Meininger.
Hi.
We excuse Kevin Fiesel. Somebody is scheduling training right now when he's supposed to be on the podcast, and so we'll have to get that memo into his travel assistant, right? Maybe we can figure that out. So we excuse him for today, but thanks for joining in. We're always glad to have you, compañeros, wherever you are joining. If you are on the live stream or joining us from your favorite podcast app, welcome. So today's episode, the original intent of today's episode was given to me by a question, or a question was asked. Well, maybe I shouldn't say question. A phrase was given to me, and it made me think, and I'm like, what is the difference there? And so we'll get into it in a little bit, but ultimately we're talking about EDI versus ETL. And so we'll hit on that, and admittedly I was a little unsure of how long that would take us. And so I hit Eugene up at the last moment, and I'm like, hey Eugene, remember that magic hat of tricks of demos that you have, right? Can you pull something out of that? And
this is what happens when you're a professional presenter and teacher and stuff.
yeah, that's right. So now I should make the caveat, right, that Eugene and I do have a let's see, I was going to say special relationship, but so not just anybody can ask Eugene to pull something out of his demo hat. So beware. Okay. So again, ETL versus EDI is our topic today. But as always, compañeros, before we get into that, our show notes today are going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/EDI or at SQLDataPartners.com/216. I do not have any SQL Server in the news today, so you'll forgive us, but we do have a few shout-outs. Megacha29, thanks for giving us a little shout-out. Graves Kilgard, Michael Armentrout. It's been a while, Michael. I hope you are well. Still doing something with Clickstream, although I think you've left that position. But anyway, hope all's well there. Andrew Notarian. So in between us, so I think he's up in Maryland, although he might be in DC. Anyway.
And I think Andy either lives in Bethesda or complains about Bethesda.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I don't remember which. Pretty sure he's Maryland.
I believe he's in Maryland. I agree.
Yeah,
right.
He works for the NIH, so he works in DC, but
yeah,
pretty sure he's in Bethesda.
So shout out to you, Andrew, Saeed, Islam, Rasik Kodaya, and compañeros. Again, you'll forgive me, right, for these if I mispronounce your name. Ken Pullman, Tom Marsden, Chris Serfilis, Ibrahim Barut, Hamad Babai, and Simio Langa. So thanks, compañeros. Hey, Mala has joined the show, so welcome, Mala. I see Doug on as well. So welcome, compañeros, those again who are following us to the live stream. Okay, so we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that SQL Trail is coming March 18th. Still working out the details there. So we haven't announced the schedule, which I was hoping to do today, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So mostly on my end, we have folks that are interested. I've asked a couple of things of them, and we're trying to figure out if we can still make that happen. So hopefully, the next week or so, we'll get it set and out the door. So we hope compañeros to see you on the SQL Trail this year, March 18th. Okay, so the question or the comment that arose. So we were looking at doing So we're asked by a customer, right, to do a data import. And we were talking about how it was going to work. And the comment she made was, well, if we were doing true EDI, then, and I can't remember exactly what she said after that. But that comment, I'm like, okay, true EDI. I'm like, So it got me thinking a little bit, and I thought we would bring it here. And for those of you who are in the conversation, we're always happy to take your comments. But the question in my mind, the question arose in my mind: what is the difference between EDI and ETL, right, or ELT?
Yep.
And so that is the question that I want to pose to you today, compañeros. So I guess, right, first takes, or you want me to jump in?
No. So it's funny whenever you sent the topic, because I was like, man, I've not had to deal with that acronym for like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
But I had to deal with it. And to me, EDI is very much about an interchange of business documents, right? Representing kind of business events. And so, unlike ETL, which you're commonly going to have just intra in an organization, EDI is almost always inter-organizational between two different organizations, because it's basically finding a way to get these two different businesses, or multiple, chains to talk to each other in a way they can both understand. And it's really kind of clunky to deal with from whenever I looked into it, because it's a little old and creaky. And it reminds me a lot of the old service-oriented architecture of back in the day, where everybody got super excited about microservices, where it's, service-oriented architecture is like, okay, we need to find some way to be able to get these different programs in the organization to talk to each other. So we're going to send these bulky XML SOAP messages from one organization to another. But it solved a real problem, right? So I mean, you can put this on the tweet that goes out, but to me, EDI is service-oriented architecture for businesses. That's the way that it kind of fits in my head right now, having kind of refreshed myself on it.
Okay, so one of the so what caught me, or what caught my interest here, and Eugene, you've kind of jumped into it, is, well, there's this exchange of information, and now again, we were doing ETL, right? And so I'm in the Microsoft Data Platform. So generally, I think about SSIS, right, as my ETL, right, partner, if you will. And there's other ways. You can do it in SQL Server. I mean, you can manipulate data inside the database engine, right? You don't necessarily have to use this, this third party. But it was like, okay, well, what's the difference? I mean, even so, if we use SOAP, or if we use, SSIS, right? Like, why do we have this, this difference? And so I want to jump in here. Kevin actually chimed in, and he said something that I thought was, was interesting, and something that I found. And again, I think to a certain extent, now, I guess I'll go ahead and say, while I believe there is a difference, what's the word? There's some fine differences. In the end, I think it's all just kind of a, 3-letter acronym spaghetti. Like, we're all eating pasta, at the end. But his thought is that EDI, as you mentioned, right? So interfaces between two customers. So how am I, or two organizations rather. So how is organization 1 going to share information with organization 2? And so, and it's more of the, hey, what am I going to share? And these are the things that I'm going to share, right? Whereas ETL is a bit more on the, okay, now how I'm going to move the data. I'm now going to pick it up someplace. I'm going to transform it. I'm going to do with it what I will, right? But EDI is, if you will, a bit more on the architecture level.
It's the logical implementation versus the physical implementation.
That's right. Some of that difference. And again, right, so then, you have kissing cousins of, right, ETL versus ELT, right? Or like, how am I going to move that data, that data around? And so I thought that was, I guess perhaps telling, right, is in terms of I need to, so if I'm thinking about EDI, right, I'm going to architect this information. I need to tell my customer or my counterpart, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I need, and then they're going to get that to me, present it somehow, and then we figure out the ETL, pieces.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, what was interesting is that there are a few more acronyms that I found along the way, which I thought were, again, right, I don't know if funny is the right word, but there is, so EAI, Enterprise Application Integration. I'm like, okay. And again, so they have, it talks about an application connecting to different data, but again, I'm like, it all kind of seems like the same thing to me. And then EII, Enterprise Information Integration, right? Which again, I think is kind of the messy middle, in which, it's like, okay, here are the nuts and bolts, or here's how the data is going to get from one place into the other. But basically, I think I feel okay with, and I guess maybe before I leave that comment, I want to chime in. So Doug here. So I see EDI as a subset of ETL. Interesting. EDI reminds me of like mainframe direct import, where ETL gives you transform. Okay. Yes, I mean generally, but I think that definition of interchange between two organizations is a strong characteristic, right, of EDI. Whereas ETL, I am generally only talking about information, how information flows inside my own organization.
Yeah, I mean, so one important way to maybe view it is to look at, like, if you wanted to become an expert in technology X, not even technology, but process X, 3-letter acronym X, what would that look like, right? And, somewhat realistically, you could become an ETL expert without any business domain knowledge whatsoever, right? Like, you're going to have a hard time working and integrating with a business and being a consultant or something like that.
Sure.
But you could, if you're stuck on an island with, like, a nice computer and a bunch of coconuts and some SSIS books, maybe, some videos from Andy Leonard, you could become an SSIS expert.
Sure.
Right? But a lot of these other pieces, you really do have to understand the business. So, like, when you look at the whole thing with EDI, so much of what it is revolves around business objects and concepts, right? Very, very distinctly. So, the idea of an invoice, or a request for quote, or, picking list and warehouses and procurement. Like, these are all vocab that are firmly rooted in, business. There's no EDI thing for a date table, right?
Sure.
I think that's an important thing. And then, in my mind, there's also, like, how much jankiness you want to deal with. You talked about enterprise application integration. That sounds a lot like Microsoft BizTalk, right?
Sure. Okay.
Which, is, from what I've heard, I've thankfully never had to deal with it, was a giant pain in the butt, right? So I think that there's the whole, like, how much this is revolved specifically and uniquely around business concepts, and then how much, like, mess and pain and enterprise difficulty are you willing to deal with?
To endure, yeah.
Yeah, right, because, the moment you step out of your fancy ETL stuff, it's no longer just, like, pure theoretical Kafka messaging queues and Hadoop and all this stuff. It's like, oh, we have to agree what an invoice is. Something else this reminds me of is the whole, what used to be called Microsoft Common Data Service, and I think they renamed it a couple months ago to Microsoft Dataverse.
Oh.
But it's the same idea where you think about it. Microsoft, they partnered with, I think it was like Adobe and maybe SAP. I think SAP. They were trying to shoot across the bow of Salesforce. I remember that. And they're like, we're going to come up with all these standard definitions for like dozens of business objects. And make it so you can extend it and pull the data into Power BI or make apps and Power Apps that work against it. But it feels like a very similar thing where it's like, okay, we're trying to standardize the data definition around these business objects so that a bunch of different integrations now become possible. So yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see this in different places, but you can't become an expert in EDI without having a book on business or understanding these business concepts. But for ETL, you can become an expert in it. You won't be an effective one.
Sure.
You'll be confused the moment someone says the word credit memo. But you can do it.
Yeah. So. Anyway, compañeros, I thought this might be of interest to you. I mean, one of the things that, and I think maybe I don't know if trap is the right word, but we've just identified or talked about a couple of different changes. One of my knee-jerk reaction was, again, like I guess I said it in the beginning, right? It's all the same, right? Why does it really matter? And sometimes I think it can matter, particularly in the larger organizations you get, and the more niche it is, and you're trying to like who's going to handle this and who's going to make these decisions. Sometimes the people in the room can change depending on what it is that you're actually talking about.
Yeah, I think something else to home in on with whole EDI versus ETL. ETL, we're generally dealing with somewhat managed data, not transitions, but data loading, data migration, however you want to call it, right? Moving data from one regular system to another.
Mm-hmm.
With EDI, you could be sending like invoices via carrier pigeon and it might be compliant. Right? Because if you look at I kid you not, because if you look at the Wikipedia page for it, and you go to, I think, transmission,
examples,
transmission protocols, like FTP, email, HTTP, for a fact, there's two businesses right now that are sending, PDFs over email or something.
Sure.
They're calling it EDI.
There you go.
Or whatever, maybe not PDFs, but something that's slightly parsable, but they're just doing data dumps.
Right.
In some arcane system, like just raw FTP or something like that. And so, if you told me that we're going to set up an ETL process for our entire organization, for our data warehouse, and we're going to send data dumps, CSV files over email, my eyes would bulge out of my head.
Right.
I think it's worth saying that not only Kevin talked about how EDI talks a lot about the logical side of things, the logical implementation, the what, but not only does it not describe the how, but sometimes that how is just sending floppy disks via carrier pigeon, and you have to be aware of that when you start dealing with these arcane systems.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. So one of his wrap up components is this gives us a nice separation of duties, right? So the EDI versus ETL, as we can have business analysts discussing the makeup of these files and data engineers discussing the processing and analysis of the data.
Right.
And outside of a few touch points, right, they can be handled independently. So I think that kind of echoing again what you said, but to give credit, to give Kevin his moment, in the sun. So, what do you think, compañeros? Right? Did we get that? Do you agree with our?
Did we butcher it?
Did we butcher it? Is there something else? Do you have another 3-letter acronym that you'd like to get in there and be like, well, now hang on here? Right? What about this other thing?
I've got a 4-letter acronym because with EDI, there was a point where I had to try to learn something called CXML or XML for e-commerce.
Oh, interesting.
Because we were an HP reseller, among other things, and we had a customer that wanted to be able to use their, I forget if it was their intranet or some ERP system, but basically order laptops and notebooks and things, and then send a CXML request to us to have it get processed and everything. And the spec for that is like 300 pages. Not necessarily like for the procurement piece specifically, but for the whole CXML specification,
Wow.
It's like 300 pages.
Just a little light reading. Like, what's the problem, right? Like,
yeah, well, I was this like greenhorn developer at the time, right? So it did not work out trying to like understand that and implement that in like ASP.NET MVC from like scratch. It was just
yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad to be out of that. Glad to be not hearing those 3-letter acronyms for the past half decade for sure.
Yeah, that's funny. And well, I guess that's for another episode.
Sure.
But yeah, so compañeros, let us know what you think there. So we would like to do something else. We're going to transition here slightly to do something new. And Eugene, and so for you who are listening on the podcast, hang in there, and we're going to see if we can make this work, and we'll see how this works for you.
Yeah,
let's
see.
see.
To show off
Here we
reporting
go.
a little bit, just something really basic with Power BI that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So for those of you who are are online, right? Hopefully this screen share works, and yeah. So you're going to talk to us about query folding then today.
Query folding. Yep.
Here we go.
Okay. So I've got Power BI Desktop up, and if you're going to be working with Power BI and even doing any kind of data transformation at all, you really, really need to understand query folding. So let's imagine that I get some data from SQL Server. This is a brand new file. I've got AdventureWorks, the most famous marketing database of all time. It's not a good demo database because they like have all these weird things like GUIDs and
sure.
XML data types and all that kind of stuff.
So now I thought Worldwide Importers was going to take that over. Is that not? It hasn't.
It's around. I feel like Wide World Importers, they swapped it.
Why? There we go.
Yeah, it's the Wide World. I feel like that ended up being heavily focused around new features in 2016, but I don't know. I'm looking at the 2014 one. I'm not sure what the most common one is.
I digress.
Yeah. So let's see. Product. So let's say I pull in product and I do transform data. Let's get this over onto the screen. Come on. So one of the things that's important is you don't want Power BI to be doing all of the work when it comes to transforming the data, right? So the whole idea is like, let's say I grab...
Share the wealth.
Yeah, right. Well, the SQL Server that you're pulling from, hopefully, is optimized for a lot of this stuff, right? So, if I remove other columns and I filter so that I just want gray products, for example. Apparently there's only one gray product in AdventureWorks. But, yeah. If I do that, the nice thing is, without me telling the system to do it, Power BI is smart enough to push down some of that work to the SQL Server. And so if I do view native query, now this only works if I went through the GUI and created the query that way. If I hand coded it and then make transformations, it's not going to fold it, right? But we can right click on the step, and if view native query isn't grayed out, we can see what it's sending to the SQL Server, right? And so here it's sending the filtering to it, and so then we're not pulling in thousands or millions of rows, it's telling SQL Server what to do. And in fact, I'm going to pull up Profiler, even though I shouldn't, because I haven't been a DBA in 2 years, so I don't remember how to do any of this stuff, right? But if we clear that out, taking a long time to get one row. Let's see if we can.
It's nothing like doing it live.
Well, here we go. So we can see that it's running some dynamic SQL, and it's running the SQL that it told us it was going to run, right? It does some weird stuff behind the scenes, right? I don't know for sure if it does this whole subquery dance because that's just the way that it generates the query, or if it's because it wants to verify the number of the correct rows before it pulls it in. I'm not sure. But we can see kind of clearly that it's just grabbing the columns that we need, and it's doing that filtering for us. And sometimes you're going to have steps that might break query folding. Let's see, can I get back to it? If I go to transform data, let's see. I think a good example, I think we've got like capitalize every word. So if I do transform, capitalize each word, that's a transformation that doesn't exist in SQL, right? So view native query is grayed out. And so if I go back, if I clear that out, and then we say close and apply, it's going to take a while to load one row. Okay, actually no. So this is impressive. So it was still smart enough to push down some of the query folding. So they've gotten better about this because let's do a refresh just to be sure.
Certain.
Yeah. So refresh. But there are some things that will break query folding, but it looks like probably in this case it's being smart enough. Okay, yeah, so it's still pushing it down. So just because it's grayed out doesn't necessarily mean that you've broken query folding, or at least that it won't be able to push it all down. They've been getting much better at it. But at the same time, what you want to do to be safe is, if possible, you want to have any steps that get grayed out to be last. Because then you can see the query that's sending, and you know for sure that at least that much is getting folded in, right? So simple things like filters, removing columns, some of the trim kind of stuff, anything that has a good SQL Server equivalent, you want to have that near the beginning. And there's going to be some stuff where there's not an equivalent, and that's fine, but you want to make sure that you try to have those near the end. But you can get really good performance improvements as a result of it.
So is it fair enough to say, so if I go back in there and look at the query, and if I see a where clause, that's ultimately what I'm looking for? Is that the knuckle dragging Neanderthals version of what I want to see for query folding?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. It's hard when, like, let's say you did this the right way and you put an extended event, you saw the same kind of stuff.
Sure.
It takes a little bit of sifting, unfortunately, because it's doing some work behind the scenes to get an idea of what the structure is, to see if there's any foreign keys, to see what columns it's dealing with, all that kind of stuff. So you have to dig around, but yeah, if you see like a where clause, then it's doing query folding, it's working, and you just want to keep an eye out for whatever table you're looking for. But even simpler than that, in the Power Query editor, if you right-click on a step and you can see View Native Query, then you know it's working. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Right? And if it's grayed out, like
that's
here,
when.
Yeah, there's a good chance that you've broken query folding.
Right.
Now, sometimes Microsoft is still smart enough to do the parts that they need to do.
Right. Like we saw earlier, right?
Yeah, but sometimes they're not.
Sure.
So that's just something to bear in mind. But it's nice because it's performant out of the box. Now, it's worth saying though, right? If you're used to being a DBA, you're used to hand coding all of this artisanal SQL queries, right? So, let me do. Okay. Because what could happen is I could say, oh, well, I know better than the people at Microsoft. So,
always a dangerous proposition.
Options, and I'm going to just do my select star because I haven't been a DBA in 2 years. And so I'll get rid of this old one, so it doesn't come up in our logs. But then we'll do the same thing, right? So remove other columns, and we'll filter on gray. And then try to clear that out. Okay, so let's see what we got. It's running my raw query.
Right. There's no benefit there.
It's not even bother trying to look at foreign keys. It's like, I don't know what you're giving me. It takes it in. And the problem is, if we take a look, now that's a lookup table. It's a dimension. So it's not terrible, but do. So if I run that, I've got 500 rows. That's not a ton, but if we were doing a transaction table, it could be 1 million rows.
Sure.
Right? So yeah, you want to avoid handcrafting your SQL when you're working with Power BI unless absolutely necessary, because you might shoot yourself in the foot performance-wise.
Right. Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Eugene. We do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that, let's see, go back. That is going to do it for today's episode, compañeros. Thanks again for tuning in. Let's see, if you want to connect with us on social media, you can do so. How they connect with you, Eugene?
They can find me on Twitter at SQLgene or my blog, SQLgene.com, but you won't find me next week because we're driving as far south as we can and ignoring everything.
You'll be out of here. Okay. So, Mala, Doug, and the others who have joined us today and chose to chime in, I think Dan may still be on here. Thanks for tuning in. You can connect with me, as always, here on Twitch, or on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon. Again, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.